The private jet gleamed under the afternoon sun, its polished surface reflecting the hurried movements of the ground crew as they prepared for departure. Inside the cabin, the air hummed with quiet efficiency. Fresh flowers adorned the tables, the leather seats were impeccably arranged, and the scent of luxury lingered in every corner. This was no ordinary flight, though none of the staff knew it yet. The owner of the plane, Aisha Johnson, had chosen to travel incognito today. Dressed in simple but elegant attire, dark jeans, a fitted blazer, and minimal jewelry, she looked like any other affluent passenger, not the billionaire who owned the entire airline. Aisha had done this before, slipping into the background to observe how her employees treated customers when they thought no one important was watching. Some airlines preached courtesy, but real service revealed itself when the wealthy weren't looking. She settled into her seat, her sharp eyes already noting the way the flight attendants moved, some with genuine warmth, others with barely concealed indifference. Then there was Lisa Carter, a blonde woman with a sharp tongue and a permanent smirk, who moved through the cabin like she owned it. When Aisha politely requested an extra blanket, Lisa barely glanced at her before sighing loudly. "You'll have to wait," she snapped, her tone dripping with irritation. "We have actual priority guests to attend to first." Aisha's eyebrow lifted slightly, but she said nothing, watching as Lisa fawned over a loud, obnoxious businessman who clearly enjoyed the attention. Minutes passed. The cabin grew cooler. Aisha asked again, this time a little firmer. Lisa whirled around, her face twisted in annoyance. "Did I stutter?" she hissed, leaning in too close. "You don't get to make demands just because you scraped together enough for a ticket. Sit down." The words hung in the air, ugly and deliberate. Aisha's expression darkened, but before she could respond, Lisa's hand shot out, smack. The sharp sound of the slap echoed through the cabin. A stunned silence followed. Passengers gasped. Aisha's cheek burned, but her fury was ice-cold. Lisa smirked, brushing her hands together as if swatting away a gnat. "Maybe now you'll learn some manners," she sneered before strutting away, completely oblivious to the storm she had just unleashed. As the flight continued, Lisa bragged to her co-workers about putting entitled passengers in their place, laughing like she'd won some petty victory. Meanwhile, Aisha sat motionless, her mind already weaving a plan. The woman who had just struck her had no idea who she was. No idea that she had just signed her own ruin. By the time the plane touched down, Aisha had already sent a single message from her phone, an order to the airline's CEO. By morning, Lisa Carter's life would begin unraveling in ways she couldn't possibly imagine. And Aisha? She would make sure the woman never forgot the day she slapped a billionaire. The moment the plane's wheels touched down, the usual hum of post-flight activity began, passengers unbuckling seatbelts, overhead bins clicking open, the muffled rustle of coats being retrieved. But in the cockpit, an entirely different scene was unfolding. Captain Daniel Reyes, a seasoned pilot with 20 years of experience flying for Luxwing Airlines, had just received a priority message on his private company tablet. His blood ran cold as he read the words, "Secure the cabin. Owner on board. Situation critical." His eyes flicked to the security footage on his screen, zeroing in on first class. There, sitting with an unsettling stillness, was Aisha Johnson. And the red mark on her cheek told him everything he needed to know. Daniel's hands tightened around the tablet. He had met Aisha once before at a corporate event. Her presence was unforgettable. She carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who never needed to raise her voice because her mere attention commanded obedience. Now, someone had dared to lay hands on her. On his plane. Under his command. The sheer magnitude of the offense made his stomach twist. He immediately activated the aircraft's secure protocol, locking down communications to ensure no word of this incident leaked before Aisha decided how to handle it. Then, with a deep breath, he picked up the cabin phone. "Lisa Carter to the cockpit." Immediately. His voice was steel. In the galley, Lisa froze mid-laugh, her smug grin faltering. The other flight attendants exchanged glances. Nobody got summoned to the cockpit like that unless something was very wrong. Her throat went dry, but she smoothed her uniform and forced a smirk. "Probably some VIP complaining about turbulence," she muttered, rolling her eyes for her co-worker's benefit. But as she walked the narrow aisle, the weight of unease settled over her. The cockpit door hissed open, and Lisa stepped inside only to lock eyes with Aisha, who sat calmly in the co-pilot's seat. The billionaire's expression was unreadable, but the air in the room turned lethal. Captain Reyes stood rigid, his face pale. "Ms. Carter," he said, voice clipped, "this is Aisha Johnson. The Aisha Johnson, owner and CEO of Luxwing Global." Lisa's stomach dropped. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The blood drained from her face as the reality of her mistake crashed over her. The woman she'd slapped wasn't just some nobody, she was the most powerful person in the room. The most powerful person in the industry. Aisha finally spoke, her voice soft but razor-sharp. "You struck me." 3 words, and yet they felt like a death sentence. Lisa's hands trembled. I didn't know." "That's the problem," Aisha interrupted, tilting her head slightly. "You assumed. And now?" She leaned forward, just enough to make Lisa flinch. "Now you'll learn what happens when you disrespect the wrong person." Captain Reyes swallowed hard. He'd seen corporate firings before, but this was different. This was personal. Lisa's knees nearly buckled. "Please, I'll do anything." "You'll do nothing," Aisha said, standing. "Except finish this flight like the professional you pretend to be. And then," a slow, icy smile, "then we'll see how long you last in this world without my mercy." The silence that followed was suffocating. Lisa's career, her future, her entire livelihood, all of it had just evaporated in the span of a single conversation. And as Aisha strode past her without, Miriam's throat worked as she swallowed. "Zero tolerance, Ms. Johnson. Immediate termination." Lisa's breath hitched. "You can't be serious." Aisha's gaze snapped to her, and the words died in Lisa's throat. "I've reviewed your file, Ms. Carter," she continued, as if Lisa hadn't spoken. 3 formal complaints in the last year alone. A pattern of disrespect. And now this. She tapped a single key on the tablet in front of her, and the room's screen flickered to live security footage from the plane, crystal clear, showing Lisa's sneer, the swift arc of her hand, the sharp crack of the slap. Robert Vance closed his eyes briefly, as if praying for patience. "Ms. Carter," he said, voice strained, "your employment with Luxwing is terminated. Effective immediately." Lisa's face twisted. "You're firing me over some rich bitch who?" The security officers stepped forward, but Aisha raised a hand, stopping them. She stood, smoothing her blazer, and walked slowly toward Lisa. The room held its breath. When she spoke, her voice was so quiet only Lisa could hear. "You think this is just about the slap?" Aisha murmured. "No. This is about the arrogance. The belief that you could treat people like garbage and face no consequences." She stepped back, raising her voice just enough for the others to hear. "Collect your things. You're done here." Lisa's hands clenched into fists. "You'll regret this." Aisha smiled, a cold, razor-thin thing. "No, Lisa. You will." The walk to HR was a blur. The paperwork was signed in stunned silence. And by the time Lisa stepped out of the airport into the glaring afternoon sun, her badge confiscated, her locker emptied, the reality of her situation began to sink in. She pulled out her phone, thumb hovering over her boyfriend Mark's number, but before she could dial, a notification popped up. A text from him, stark and unforgiving. "Heard what happened. Don't come home." Lisa stared at the screen, her stomach churning. This couldn't be happening. Not this fast. But it was. And as she stood there, stranded in the shadow of the airport she'd once worked in, the first threads of Aisha's revenge were already tightening around her. The firing was just the beginning. The days following Lisa's termination unfolded like a slow-motion nightmare, each hour peeling back another layer of the comfortable existence she had once taken for granted. The high-rise apartment she shared with Mark, now just his apartment, as his last text had made brutally clear, was off-limits, leaving her to drag her suitcase into a dingy motel on the outskirts of the city. The peeling wallpaper and the hum of flickering neon lights outside her window were a far cry from the polished luxury she was used to, but it was all she could afford after the sudden evaporation of her income. Lisa had assumed finding another job would be simple. She had years of experience, a decent resume, and the kind of looks that usually made hiring managers smile. But the aviation industry was a small world, and word traveled fast. The first airline she applied to welcomed her warmly until their background check flagged her as ineligible for rehire from Luxwing. The second interview ended abruptly when the recruiter's phone buzzed with a call from someone whose name made their expression shift to pity. By the third rejection, Lisa was seething. She stormed into the office of Sky High Airlines, demanding an explanation from the hiring manager, a weary-looking man named Gregory Holt. Gregory sighed, rubbing his temples. "Look, Lisa," he said, sliding a paper across the desk. It was an industry-wide memo, circulated quietly but effectively. "Lisa Carter, do not hire. Permanently blacklisted." At the bottom, in small but unmistakable print, was the Luxwing insignia and beneath it, the initials AJ. Lisa's hands shook. "She can't do this." Gregory gave her a look that bordered on sympathy. "She owns half the private fleets on the East Coast. She can." The motel room felt even smaller when she returned, the walls closing in as she paced like a caged animal. She needed money. Fast. That was when she remembered the side hustle she'd kept quiet about, a little online boutique selling borrowed luxury items from first-class passengers who'd left them behind. A few designer sunglasses, a forgotten watch, a pair of Louboutins she'd convinced herself their owner wouldn't miss. It wasn't technically stealing, she'd told herself. Just creative redistribution. She logged into her resale account, relieved to see a balance that could cover another week at the motel. But the relief was short-lived. An alert popped up, account frozen pending IRS investigation. Lisa's blood turned to ice. The knock at the door came an hour later. Two men in suits stood in the dim hallway, badges glinting under the flickering light. "Lisa Carter," the taller one said, his voice devoid of inflection. "We're with the IRS. We'd like to ask you a few questions about your undeclared income." Panic clawed up her throat. "There's been a mistake." The agent cut her off, reading from a tablet. "Approximately $28,000 in unreported earnings over the past 18 months. You're looking at fines, penalties, and possible criminal charges." Lisa's mind raced. Who had tipped them off? The answer was obvious, a whisper in the back of her skull: Aisha. As the agents began listing her options, none of them good, Lisa's phone buzzed. A notification from her bank. "Account overdrawn. Immediate payment required." She stared at it, the reality of her situation crystallizing. Aisha wasn't just ruining her career. She was dismantling her life, piece by piece. And the worst part? Lisa had no idea how to stop her. The IRS investigation had hollowed Lisa out. Between the fines, the legal fees, and the frozen assets, she was left with nothing but the clothes on her back and a gnawing desperation that kept her awake at night. The motel had evicted her after the third missed payment, leaving her to bounce between the couches of increasingly reluctant acquaintances until even those ran out. Pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. For the first time in her life, Lisa Carter was truly desperate. That was why, when the message appeared in her inbox, she didn't question it too deeply. Quick cash opportunity. Discreet. No questions asked. Meet at Hangar 7B, private airfield off Route 45. Midnight. Come alone. It was unsigned, but Lisa didn't care. The promise of money, any money, was enough to override the voice in the back of her mind whispering that this was too convenient. That night, she hitchhiked to the airfield, the cold wind biting through her thin jacket as she trudged past chain-link fences and darkened warehouses. Hangar 7B loomed ahead, its massive doors. She should have walked away. But the thought of another night sleeping in her car, another day scraping for change, was enough to silence her doubts. "Fine. Where's the money?" He tossed her a thick envelope. She thumbed through the bills, real, crisp, and unquestionably tempting. Then he handed her a small, locked briefcase. "Deliver this to the buyer at the airstrip in Tijuana. No stops. No deviations." Lisa nodded, gripping the case. This was risky. Possibly illegal. But what choice did she have? The flight was uneventful, the hum of the jet's engines a steady backdrop to her racing thoughts. She tried not to think about what might be in the case. Drugs. Weapons. It didn't matter. She'd be in and out, cash in hand, and then she could start rebuilding. But when the plane touched down in Tijuana, the runway was eerily empty. No buyer. No cars. Just the distant wail of sirens. Lisa's stomach dropped. The cockpit door burst open. Hands where we can see them. Swarming the jet were federal agents, guns drawn, their shouts overlapping in a cacophony of authority. Lisa barely had time to register what was happening before she was yanked from her seat, the briefcase ripped from her grasp. One of the agents popped the locks and inside, nestled in foam padding, were rows of pristine, uncut diamonds. "Lisa Carter," the lead agent said, snapping cuffs around her wrists, "you're under arrest for international smuggling." The world tilted. This wasn't just a mistake. This was a setup. As they dragged her away, Lisa caught a glimpse of a familiar face in the crowd, a Luxwing executive, watching calmly from the sidelines, phone in hand. Recording everything. And then it hit her. Aisha hadn't just cut her off from the industry. She hadn't just ruined her financially. She'd made sure Lisa would never be free again. The fluorescent lights of the detention center buzzed like angry wasps, their harsh glow leaching the color from Lisa's skin as she sat on the edge of a stiff plastic cot. The cell reeked of bleach and sweat, the kind of smell that clung to the back of the throat and refused to fade. 3 days. 3 days since the arrest, since the smug satisfaction on the federal agents' faces as they'd processed her, since the cold realization had settled into her bones this wasn't just bad luck. This was orchestrated. Her court-appointed lawyer, a harried man named Dennis Cole, had laid it out for her in the bleakest terms. Without evidence to prove she'd been set up, without money to hire a real defense, she was looking at years behind bars. The diamonds in that briefcase were tied to a known cartel operation. The prosecution wasn't interested in her claims of ignorance. Lisa had screamed until her voice cracked. "Aisha Johnson did this. She owns the goddamn airline. She set me up." Dennis had sighed, rubbing his temples. "Even if that's true, Lisa, you walked into that hangar willingly. You took the briefcase. You got on the plane. A jury isn't going to care who handed it to you." The weight of those words pressed down on her like a physical force. Bail was denied. Her few remaining friends had ghosted. Even Mark, when she'd finally gotten a call through to him, had laughed bitterly. "You really thought you could slap a billionaire and walk away? You're even dumber than I thought." The line had gone dead, and with it, the last shred of her old life. Then came the plea deal. 5 years in federal prison if she confessed. 10 if she fought it and lost. Lisa had never felt fear like this, not the sharp, fleeting kind, but the slow, suffocating dread of a door slamming shut behind her with no way back. She signed the papers with a shaking hand. The morning of her sentencing, she was led into the courtroom in an orange jumpsuit, her hair limp, her hands cuffed. The judge's voice was a distant drone. The gavel fell. And just like that, Lisa Carter became inmate number 87429. But the worst part. As the guards marched her out, she caught a glimpse of a familiar figure in the back row of the courtroom. Aisha. Not smirking. Not gloating. Just watching, her expression as unreadable as it had been on the plane that day. And in that moment, Lisa understood the true depth of her mistake. This wasn't just revenge. It was annihilation. The clang of metal doors slamming shut echoed through the sterile prison hallway as Lisa shuffled forward in the line of inmates, her orange jumpsuit hanging loosely on her gaunt frame. 2 years had passed since her sentencing, though it felt like a lifetime. The once proud flight attendant had been reduced to a ghost of herself, her hair dull, her hands calloused from menial labor, her spirit broken by the relentless grind of incarceration. Every morning, she woke to the same gray walls, the same hollow-eyed stares of women who, like her, had been discarded by the world. Then came the letter. It arrived on a Tuesday, delivered by a bored guard who barely glanced at it before sliding it across the cafeteria table. The envelope was crisp, expensive, the kind of paper that didn't belong in a place like this. Lisa's fingers trembled as she tore it open, her breath catching at the embossed letterhead, Luxwing Global. The message was short. Brutally so. Ms. Carter. In light of your circumstances, I am offering you a choice. A single opportunity to regain some semblance of your former life. Report to Luxwing Hangar 12 upon your release. 8 a.m. sharp. A. Johnson. Lisa read it 3 times, her pulse hammering. Was this mercy? A final humiliation? She didn't know. But for the first time in years, she felt something flicker inside her hope. Release day came with no fanfare. The gates clanked open, and Lisa stepped into the weak morning sunlight, squinting like a creature dragged from the depths. She had nothing but the clothes on her back and the crumpled letter in her pocket. Hangar 12 loomed before her, its sleek glass and steel facade a stark contrast to the barbed wire and concrete she'd left behind. Inside, the air hummed with the quiet energy of a well-oiled machine-ground crew in sharp uniforms, pilots reviewing flight plans, and at the center of it all, Aisha Johnson. She looked exactly as Lisa remembered. Impeccable. Untouchable. Aisha didn't smile as Lisa approached. You came. Lisa swallowed. I didn't have a choice. That's where you're wrong. Aisha gestured to a janitor's cart nearby, its mop and bucket gleaming under the fluorescent lights. You always had choices. You chose to slap me. You chose to steal. You chose to take that briefcase. Her voice softened, almost pitying. And now? You can choose to walk away or you can work here. Scrubbing floors. Cleaning toilets. Earning minimum wage under my roof. Lisa's fists clenched. Every instinct screamed at her to spit in Aisha's face, to storm out and never look back. But then what? Another motel? Another desperate scramble for survival? Aisha tilted her head. Well, the silence stretched. Then, slowly, Lisa reached for the mop. Aisha's lips curved not in triumph, but in something colder. Something final. Wise decision. As she walked away, her heels clicking against the polished concrete, Lisa gripped the mop handle until her knuckles turned white. She had lost. Completely. Irrevocably. And the worst part? She'd done it to herself.